Can you imagine waking up every day not knowing if you would see the next? Every shadow hiding a threat, every kindness a potential deception. October 27, 1944. 03:17 hours. Camp Hereford, Texas. A cold wind whistled through the barbed wire fences, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant cattle. Inside the wooden barracks, rows of cots held sleeping figures, each lost in their own private war of memories and anxieties. Outside, Sergeant Miller patrolled the perimeter, his breath misting in the pre-dawn chill. He was a man hardened by years of service, but even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that permeated the camp tonight. The Italian prisoners of war, usually a boisterous bunch, had been strangely quiet for days. Miller paused near Barracks D, the air thick with the smell of stale tobacco and sweat. A sliver of light escaped from under the door, against regulations. He gripped his rifle, the metal cold against his gloved hand, and pushed the door open. Inside, a small group of prisoners huddled around a makeshift table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a hidden oil lamp. Cards lay scattered on the table, but they weren't playing. Instead, they were whispering, their voices hushed with an intensity that sent a shiver down Miller's spine. "What's going on here?" Miller demanded, his voice sharp. The prisoners startled, their faces paling in the lamplight. One of them, a young man with haunted eyes, quickly snuffed out the lamp. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. "Nothing, Sergeant," said an older prisoner, his voice raspy. "Just talking." Miller didn't believe him for a second. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowed. The air was thick with unspoken tension and something else, a subtle scent he couldn't quite place. He noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box on the table, half hidden beneath a pile of blankets. "What's that?" asked, pointing to the box with his rifle. The prisoners hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Finally, the older man stepped forward. "It's nothing, Sergeant, just a souvenir." Miller reached for the box, his instincts screaming that it was anything but a souvenir. As he touched it, one of the younger prisoners lunged forward, trying to grab it back. Miller reacted instantly, shoving the prisoner against the wall. The others surged forward, their faces contorted with fear and desperation. A scuffle broke out, a chaotic mess of bodies and shouts in the dimly lit barracks. Miller, despite being outnumbered, managed to maintain control, his military training kicking in. He wrestled the box away from the prisoners and held it aloft. "Enough," he roared, his voice cutting through the din. "I'm taking this, and you're all going to explain what's going on here." The prisoners froze, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. Miller, still wary, backed out of the barracks, the wooden box clutched tightly in his hand. He retreated to his office, a small Spartan room at the edge of the camp. He locked the door behind him and placed the box on his desk, his heart pounding in his chest. He examined the box closely. It was made of dark, polished wood, intricately carved with symbols he didn't recognize. They weren't Italian, that much he knew. They looked ancient. He tried to open the box, but it was locked. He searched his desk for a tool, finally finding a small knife. He carefully inserted the blade into the lock and twisted. With a click, the box sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a small, tarnished silver coin. It was unlike any coin Miller had ever seen. One side depicted a fierce-looking eagle, its wings spread wide, clutching a laurel wreath in its talons. The other side was even more disturbing. It showed a skull, its eye sockets hollow and menacing, surrounded by a circle of strange symbols that matched those on the outside of the box. Miller stared at the coin, a sense of dread washing over him. What was this thing, and why were the prisoners so desperate to keep it hidden? He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple souvenir. He spent the rest of the night poring over the coin, trying to decipher the symbols. He consulted every book he could find in the camp library, but to no avail. The symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that he was delving into something dark and dangerous. The next morning, Miller reported the incident to Captain Davies, the officer in charge of the camp. Davies, a pragmatic man with little patience for mysteries, dismissed Miller's concerns. "It's just a trinket, Miller," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Probably some religious thing. Don't waste your time on it. We have more important things to worry about." Miller tried to explain the prisoner's reaction, the strange symbols, the feeling of dread that the coin evoked, but Davies wouldn't listen. He ordered Miller to return the coin to the prisoners and forget about the whole thing. Miller knew he couldn't let it go. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He decided to investigate on his own, despite Davies' orders. He started by questioning the prisoners, but they clammed up, refusing to say anything about the coin or the wooden box. They looked at him with fear in their eyes, as if they were terrified of something. He noticed a pattern. Whenever he mentioned the coin, the prisoners would become agitated, their eyes darting around nervously. Some would even start to tremble. It was as if the coin held some kind of power over them. One prisoner, a young man named Marco, seemed particularly affected. He was normally a cheerful, outgoing individual, but since the incident in the barracks, he had become withdrawn and silent. Miller decided to focus his attention on Marco, convinced that he held the key to the mystery. He began to observe Marco closely, watching his every move. He noticed that Marco spent a lot of time staring out at the fence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He also noticed that Marco seemed to be communicating with the other prisoners through a series of subtle gestures and glances. Miller knew he had to find a way to break through Marco's silence. He started by treating him with kindness, offering him extra rations and engaging him in conversation. Slowly, Marco began to open up. He told Miller about his family back in Italy, about his dreams of becoming a painter, about his fear of never seeing his homeland again. Miller listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and support. He knew he had to gain Marco's trust if he wanted to learn the truth about the coin. Finally, after weeks of gentle persuasion, Miller decided to take a risk. "Marco," he said one day, "I know about the coin." Marco's eyes widened and he recoiled as if he had been struck. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Lie to me, Marco," Miller said softly. "I saw the box, I saw the coin, I know it's important. And I know you're afraid, but you can trust me, I want to help you." Marco hesitated, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he broke down, tears streaming down his face. "It's cursed," he whispered. "The coin, it's cursed." He went on to explain that the coin had been passed down through generations of his family. It was said to possess dark powers, capable of bringing misfortune and death to anyone who possessed it. His family had tried to get rid of it many times, but it always found its way back to them. When Marco was captured and sent to the prisoner of war camp, he had brought the coin with him, hoping to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. He and the other prisoners had been trying to find a way to destroy it, but they were afraid of the consequences. Miller listened to Marco's story with growing concern. He didn't believe in curses, but he couldn't deny the fear and desperation in Marco's voice. He knew that something was terribly wrong, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. He asked Marco to tell him everything he knew about the coin, its history, its powers, its secrets. Marco hesitated, but finally agreed. He told Miller tales of misfortune and death that had befallen his family over the centuries, all linked to the cursed coin. As Marco spoke, Miller felt a growing sense of unease. He realized that he was dealing with something far more dangerous than he had initially imagined. This wasn't just a simple trinket. It was a powerful object capable of influencing people's minds and hearts. He decided to take the coin to a local expert, a professor of ancient history at a nearby university. The professor examined the coin closely, his eyes widening with surprise. "This is extraordinary," he said. "This coin is very old, possibly dating back to the Roman Empire. The symbols are associated with a cult known as the Cult of the Serpent. They were a secret society that worshipped a powerful serpent god. They believed that the serpent held the key to immortality and ultimate power." The professor explained that the cult of the serpent had been suppressed by the Roman authorities, but their beliefs had continued to spread in secret. He said that the coin was likely a relic of this cult, a symbol of their dark and dangerous beliefs. Miller returned to the camp, his mind reeling. He now understood the true nature of the coin and the danger it posed. He knew that he had to destroy it, but he didn't know how. He consulted with Marco, asking him for advice. Marco said that the only way to destroy the coin was to return it to the place where it had been created, a hidden temple deep in the Italian Alps. Miller knew that this was a long shot, but he was willing to try anything. He decided to organize an escape, a secret mission to transport the coin back to Italy. He enlisted the help of a few trusted prisoners, including Marco. They planned the escape carefully, studying the camp's security procedures and identifying weaknesses in the perimeter fence. They gathered supplies including food, water, and weapons. They knew that the mission would be dangerous, but they were determined to succeed. One night, under the cover of darkness, they made their move. They slipped through the barbed wire fence and disappeared into the surrounding countryside. They traveled for days, avoiding roads and towns, making their way towards the coast. They managed to stow away on a cargo ship bound for Europe. The journey was long and arduous, but they finally arrived in Italy. They made their way to the Italian Alps following Marco's instructions. The journey was fraught with peril. They had to evade German patrols, navigate treacherous mountain passes, and battle the elements. But they pressed on, driven by their determination to destroy the cursed coin. Finally, they reached the hidden temple, a dark and forbidding structure nestled deep within the mountains. They entered the temple, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air was thick with the smell of incense and decay. They made their way to the central chamber where they found a stone altar. They placed the coin on the altar and began to chant the ancient words that Marco had taught them. As they chanted, the temple began to tremble. The air grew thick with energy. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them, a tall, gaunt man dressed in black robes. He was the high priest of the cult of the serpent, and he had been waiting for them. "You fools," he cried, "you cannot destroy the coin. It is the key to ultimate power. With it, I will rule the world." He lunged towards the altar, trying to seize the coin. Miller and the other prisoners fought back, but the high priest was too powerful. He unleashed a blast of energy that sent them flying across the chamber. The high priest grabbed the coin and held it aloft. His eyes glowed with dark power. "Now," he said, "the world will be mine." But as he spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Captain Davies, the officer in charge of the prisoner of war camp. He had followed them all the way to Italy. "It's over, priest," Davies said, his voice cold and hard. "Your cult ends here." Davies opened fire, his bullets tearing through the high priest's robes. The high priest screamed in agony and dropped the coin. Davies grabbed the coin and crushed it beneath his heel. The temple began to collapse. Miller and the other prisoners scrambled to escape, Davies right behind them. They emerged from the temple just as it crumbled to dust. They stood there, catching their breath, watching as the temple disappeared from sight. The curse was broken. The world was safe, or so they thought. Back at Camp Hereford, a new prisoner had arrived. He was quiet, unassuming, and kept to himself, but he always seemed to be watching, observing. One evening, while cleaning the latrines, he found something glinting in the dirt. It was a small, tarnished piece of silver. He picked it up, brushed it off, and stared at the symbol etched into its surface, a serpent coiled around a skull. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile. He knew he had to be patient. He had to wait for the right moment. But he also knew that the power was still there, dormant but not extinguished. The cult might have been defeated, but its influence lingered, waiting to be awakened. And he, the new prisoner, would be its instrument. He looked up at the guard tower, his eyes narrowed. Sergeant Miller. He had heard stories about him. He was the one who had discovered the coin, the one who had tried to destroy it. He was a threat. The prisoner knew what he had to do. He had to eliminate Miller. He had to silence him before he could uncover the truth. But how? Miller was always on guard, always vigilant. He would have to be careful, cunning. He noticed something about Miller. He was a creature of habit. Every morning he would walk the same route around the perimeter of the camp. Every evening he would sit in his office, reading and writing. He was predictable. The prisoner began to formulate a plan. He would use Miller's predictability against him. He would lure him into a trap. He would make him pay for what he had done. He spent the next few days observing Miller, studying his routine, learning his weaknesses. He noticed that Miller had a soft spot for the camp nurse, a young woman named Sarah. They would often talk in the evenings, sharing stories and laughter. The prisoner realized that Sarah could be his key to getting to Miller. He decided to befriend her to gain her trust. He started by offering her small gifts, a flower he had picked from the camp garden, a piece of chocolate he had saved from his rations. Sarah was wary at first, but the prisoner was persistent. He was charming and attentive, always ready to listen to her problems. Slowly, she began to let her guard down. She started to confide in him, telling him about her dreams and her fears. The prisoner listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and support. He knew he had to play his cards carefully. He couldn't reveal his true intentions, not yet. One evening, he approached Sarah with a proposition. He told her that he had a secret message for Miller, a message that could save his life. He said that he couldn't deliver the message himself because he was a prisoner. He asked Sarah if she would deliver the message for him. Sarah hesitated. She knew that it was against the rules to communicate with prisoners. But she also knew that Miller was a good man and she didn't want to see him get hurt. She agreed to deliver the message. The prisoner smiled, a cold, calculating smile. He had her right where he wanted her. He wrote a short note on a piece of paper, instructing Miller to meet him at the edge of the camp near the old oak tree. He handed the note to Sarah and told her to be careful. Sarah agreed and promised to deliver the note. The prisoner watched her go, his heart filled with anticipation. He knew that Miller would come. He couldn't resist a message that could save his life. That night, Miller received the note from Sarah. He was puzzled by the message, but he also felt a sense of unease. He knew that something was wrong. He decided to investigate. He told Sarah to stay in her quarters, promising to return soon. He grabbed his rifle and headed towards the edge of the camp. As he approached the old oak tree, he saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was the new prisoner. "What do you want?" Miller demanded, his voice sharp. The prisoner stepped forward, his face illuminated by the moonlight. He was holding something in his hand. It was a knife. "I want you to die," the prisoner said, his voice cold and emotionless. He lunged at Miller, the knife glinting in the moonlight. Miller reacted quickly, raising his rifle and firing. The prisoner screamed and fell to the ground, the knife clattering beside him. Miller approached the prisoner cautiously, his rifle still trained on him. He knelt down and examined the prisoner's face. He was dead. Miller stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He had killed a man, he had broken his oath, but he had no choice. The prisoner had tried to kill him. He had acted in self-defense. He looked down at the prisoner's body, his eyes filled with regret. He wondered who he was, where he came from, what drove him to such violence. He would never know. He noticed something clutched tightly in the prisoner's hand. He pried it open and saw a small, tarnished piece of silver. It was the serpent coin. Miller stared at the coin, his blood running cold. He thought it had been destroyed, reduced to dust in that temple thousands of miles away. But how could this be? How could it have returned? He suddenly understood. The prisoner wasn't just a random inmate. He was a member of the cult of the serpent sent to exact revenge, and somehow he had managed to smuggle a piece of the coin into the camp. Miller realized that the cult wasn't gone. It was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And he, Sergeant Miller, was its target. He knew that he couldn't stay in the camp. It was too dangerous. The cult would come after him again. They would never stop until he was dead. He decided to leave, to disappear, to start a new life under a new name. He would go far away to a place where the cult could never find him. He would be safe. He gathered his belongings, packed his bag, and wrote a letter to Sarah explaining everything that had happened. He told her that he had to leave, that he couldn't stay in the camp any longer. He told her that he would never forget her and that he would always cherish the memories they had shared. He left the letter on her desk and slipped out of the camp under the cover of darkness. He walked for miles until he reached the nearest town. He bought a train ticket and boarded the first train out of town. As the train sped away, he looked back at the camp, his eyes filled with sadness. He was leaving behind everything he had ever known, but he had no choice. He had to protect himself. He didn't know where he was going or what the future held. But he knew that he had to keep moving, to keep running, to keep hiding. He had to stay one step ahead of the cult of the serpent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the serpent coin. He stared at it for a moment, his eyes filled with hatred. He wanted to destroy it, to obliterate it from existence. But he couldn't. He knew that it was too dangerous. He decided to keep it, to study it, to learn its secrets. He would use it to track down the remaining members of the cult. He would destroy them one by one. He would avenge the death of the prisoner, and he would put an end to the cult of the serpent once and for all. He closed his hand around the coin, his fingers tightening around it. He would never let it go. It was his burden, his responsibility. He would carry it with him until the end of his days. The train rumbled on, carrying him further and further away from the camp, further and further away from the past. But the past would always be with him, etched into his soul. A constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within the world. Back at Camp Hereford, Captain Davies received a coded telegram from Washington, D.C. He read it, his face growing pale. He summoned the remaining officers to his office, his voice trembling. "Gentlemen," he said, "I have just received word that the prisoner we killed last night was not just a member of the cult of the serpent. He was a high-ranking operative of the Abwehr German military intelligence. And the serpent coin, it wasn't just a religious symbol, it was a key to something far more sinister." He paused, his eyes filled with dread. "According to this telegram, the serpent coin unlocks a secret compartment hidden beneath the floor of the general's quarters." Davies and the other officers exchanged nervous glances. They knew what that meant. The general was in danger. They rushed to the general's quarters, their hearts pounding in their chests. They burst through the door and found the general sitting at his desk, working on some paperwork. "General, you need to come with us," Davies said urgently. "Your life is in danger." The general looked up, his eyes filled with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Davies explained the situation, telling him about the cult of the serpent, the Abwehr operative, and the secret compartment beneath his floor. The general listened intently, his face growing pale. He stood up from his desk, his hand trembling. "Show me," he said. Davies led the general to a corner of the room where a loose floorboard lay hidden beneath a rug. He pried up the floorboard and revealed a small wooden box. The general knelt down and opened the box. Inside, he found a single object, a map. It was a map of the United States marked with a series of red dots. The dots were clustered around major military installations, strategic infrastructure, and key industrial centers. The general stared at the map, his blood running cold. He understood now. The cult of the serpent wasn't just a religious cult. It was a network of spies, saboteurs, and assassins working for the German government, and they were planning to launch a massive attack on the United States. He looked closer at the map, his eyes scanning the red dots. He noticed one dot in particular, a dot that was larger and more prominent than the others. It was located in Washington, D.C., directly beneath the White House. He suddenly understood the Abwehr's true objective. They weren't just planning to damage American infrastructure or disrupt the war effort. They were planning to assassinate the president. The general felt a surge of adrenaline. He had to act quickly. He had to warn Washington. He had to stop the attack before it was too late. He reached for the telephone on his desk, his hand trembling. He dialed the operator and asked to be connected to the White House. As he waited for the connection to go through, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. The door to his quarters was slowly creaking open. He turned around and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was Sarah, the camp nurse. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" the general asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Sarah didn't answer. She just stood there staring at him, her eyes cold and empty. In her hand, she held a syringe. The general's eyes widened in horror. He realized that Sarah wasn't just a nurse. She was a member of the cult of the serpent, and she had been sent to kill him. He tried to stand up to defend himself, but it was too late. Sarah lunged forward and plunged the syringe into his neck. The general gasped for air, his body convulsing. He felt a burning sensation spreading through his veins. He knew that he was dying. As his vision blurred, he saw Sarah standing over him, a sinister smile on her face. She whispered something in his ear, something that chilled him to the bone. "The serpent always finds its prey," she said. The general collapsed to the floor, his body lifeless. Sarah stood there for a moment, watching him die. Then she turned around and walked out of the room, leaving the map, the phone, and the general's lifeless body behind. She had completed her mission. But as she walked away, she didn't realize that she had left something behind. Something that could expose the cult of the serpent and its deadly plan. She had left the syringe on the floor next to the general's body. And on that syringe was a tiny, almost invisible symbol. The symbol of the serpent. But what was the serum inside the syringe meant for? Did you like it? Leave your comment and tell us if you've ever heard any interesting stories about World War II. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the most intriguing stories. /WW2 story: The syringe lay innocuously on the floor, a silent testament to the chilling events that had just transpired. Its presence, however, was a beacon in the encroaching darkness, a breadcrumb trail leading away from the general's lifeless form and towards a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of the nation. Camp Hereford in the waning days of 1944 was more than just a prison for Italian soldiers. It was a crucible of secrets, a pressure cooker of anxieties, and a stage upon which a deadly game was being played. The camp was a microcosm of the larger war, a place where loyalties were tested and appearances could be deceiving. The American guards, weary from years of conflict, sought only to maintain order and await their return home. The Italian prisoners, ostensibly the enemy, were a mixed bag of soldiers, dreamers, and schemers, each with their own hidden agendas and desires. Sergeant Miller, now a fugitive haunted by the ghost of the prisoner he had killed, was no longer just a guard. He was a man on a mission, driven by a burning need to understand the truth and to atone for his unwitting role in the unfolding catastrophe. The train rattled onward, carrying Miller deeper into the American heartland, away from the familiar confines of Camp Hereford and towards an uncertain future. He clutched the serpent coin in his pocket, its cold metal a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information he had gathered, trying to make sense of the puzzle. He thought of Marco, the young prisoner who had confided in him about the curse of the coin and the stories of misfortune and death that had plagued his family for generations. He thought of the professor at the university who had revealed the coin's connection to the cult of the serpent, a shadowy organization with roots stretching back to the Roman Empire. And he thought of Captain Davies, the pragmatic officer who had dismissed his concerns and ordered him to return the coin to the prisoners. Where was he now? Was he still alive, or had he fallen victim to the cult's deadly machinations? Back at Camp Hereford, the remaining officers stood in stunned silence, staring at the general's lifeless body. The revelation that the prisoner was a high-ranking Oboyer operative had sent shockwaves through the camp. The knowledge that the serpent coin was the key to a deadly plot had plunged them into a state of panic. Captain Davies, his face etched with guilt and disbelief, barked out orders, his voice trembling with barely suppressed emotion. The camp was placed on lockdown, every prisoner confined to their barracks. A team of investigators was dispatched to the general's quarters, tasked with scouring the room for any clues that might shed light on the Boyer's plan. The syringe was quickly discovered, its presence a chilling reminder of the treachery that had taken place. A medical technician carefully collected the syringe, placing it in a sterile container for analysis. Captain Davies watched with a grim expression, his mind racing. He knew that time was of the essence. If the Boyer was planning an attack on the United States, they had to be stopped before it was too late. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation at Camp Hereford continued, but every clue was a dead end. The prisoners remained tight-lipped, feigning ignorance and fear. Sarah the nurse had vanished without a trace, leaving behind no explanation for her actions. The medical analysis of the serum found in the syringe came back inconclusive. It was a complex mixture of chemicals, some of which were known to be deadly, but others were completely unknown. It was as if the serum had been designed to evade detection, to leave no trace of its presence. Frustration mounted and the investigation stalled. Captain Davies, plagued by guilt and haunted by the image of the general's lifeless body, was determined to uncover the truth. He knew that he had to find Sarah, to bring her to justice and to unravel the mystery of the serpent coin. But where to begin? She could be anywhere, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. In the small town of Harmony Creek, Nebraska, a new face arrived. A man calling himself John Smith rented a small room above the local diner. He was quiet and kept to himself. He spent his days reading newspapers and listening to the radio, always keeping an ear out for any news about Camp Hereford or the cult of the serpent. John Smith was, of course, Sergeant Miller in disguise, his hair dyed a dark brown and a pair of glasses masking his familiar features. He had chosen Harmony Creek because it was far from Camp Hereford, a place where he hoped to blend in and disappear. But even in this quiet corner of America, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He would catch glimpses of shadowy figures lurking in the distance, hear whispers in the wind, and feel a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He knew that the cult was still out there, searching for him, waiting for him to make a mistake. He had to be careful. He had to stay vigilant. One afternoon, while browsing the local library, Miller stumbled upon an old book on ancient Roman history. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the text, searching for any mention of the cult of the serpent. He had almost given up when he came across a passage that caught his attention. It spoke of a hidden temple located in the Italian Alps where the cult had once performed its dark rituals. The temple was said to contain a powerful artifact, a relic of immense power that was guarded by a legion of demons. Miller felt a surge of excitement. He knew that this was the clue he had been waiting for. If he could find the temple, he could destroy the artifact and put an end to the cult's reign of terror. He closed the book, his mind racing. He had a plan. He would return to Italy. He would infiltrate the temple and destroy the artifact. It was a long shot, a suicide mission, but he was willing to risk everything to stop the cult from unleashing its evil upon the world. He returned to his room above the diner, his mind made up. He would leave Harmony Creek the next morning. Back at Camp Hereford, Captain Davies was reviewing the files of all the nurses who had worked at the camp over the past few years. He was searching for any connection between Sarah and the cult of the serpent. He pored over documents, photographs, and medical records, searching for any clue that might lead him to her. He was about to give up when he came across a file that caught his attention. It was the file of a nurse named Anna Schmidt. Anna Schmidt had worked at Camp Hereford for a brief period in 1942 before being transferred to another military base. Her file contained a photograph, a black and white image of a young woman with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. Davies stared at the photograph, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen those eyes before. He had seen them in Sarah's face. He realized that Sarah wasn't just a nurse. She was Anna Schmidt, a German spy who had infiltrated Camp Hereford under a false identity. Davies dug deeper into Anna Schmidt's file, searching for any information about her background or her connections. He discovered that she had been born in Berlin, Germany, and had studied medicine at the University of Munich. He also discovered that she had been recruited by the Abwehr in 1940 and had been trained as a spy at a secret facility near the Swiss border. Davies felt a surge of anger. He had been duped. He had been manipulated by a ruthless agent who had been plotting against him all along. He slammed his fist on the desk, his face flushed with rage. He would find Anna Schmidt. He would bring her to justice. He would make her pay for what she had done. He alerted military intelligence, providing them with all the information he had gathered about Anna Schmidt. He requested that they launch a nationwide manhunt for her and that they alert all border crossings and airports. He was determined to catch her before she could escape the country. Meanwhile, Anna Schmidt, now traveling under the name of Eliza Mayer, was on a train heading towards New York City. She had changed her appearance, dyeing her hair blonde and wearing a pair of dark sunglasses. She had obtained a fake passport and a ticket for a ship bound for Argentina. She planned to disappear into the vastness of South America where she could lie low and wait for the war to end. She knew that she was being hunted, but she was confident that she could evade capture. She was a trained spy skilled in deception and evasion. She had spent years perfecting her craft, and she was prepared to use all her skills to survive. She glanced out the window, watching the American landscape blur past. She felt a sense of satisfaction. She had accomplished her mission. She had eliminated the general, and she had delivered the map to the Abwehr. The attack on the United States was imminent. She closed her eyes and smiled. The serpent was about to strike. In Washington, D.C., a team of FBI agents was working around the clock to analyze the map that had been recovered from the general's quarters. They were trying to decipher the meaning of the red dots and to identify the targets of the Abwehr's planned attack. The map was a complex puzzle, filled with symbols, codes, and cryptic markings. The agents worked tirelessly, poring over documents, consulting with experts, and running simulations. They were determined to unravel the mystery and to prevent the attack from happening. One of the agents, a young woman named Agent Sarah Jenkins, noticed something peculiar about the map. She realized that the red dots were not randomly placed. They were arranged in a specific pattern, a pattern that resembled the constellation of Serpentes. She felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that this was more than just a coincidence. She had stumbled upon a crucial clue, a key to understanding the Abwehr's plan. She alerted her supervisor, Agent Thomas Williams, and showed him the pattern. Williams stared at the map, his eyes widening in disbelief. He realized that Jenkins was right. The red dots were arranged in the shape of the Serpentes constellation. But what did it mean? Why would the Abwehr use a constellation as a guide to their targets? Jenkins and Williams consulted with an astronomer, who explained that the Serpentes constellation was associated with the cult of the serpent, a shadowy organization that had been linked to various acts of terrorism and sabotage throughout history. The astronomer explained that the cult believed that the stars held the key to ultimate power, and that they used celestial alignments to guide their actions. Jenkins and Williams realized that the Abwehr was using the Serpentes constellation as a code, a way to identify the specific targets of their attack. They began to cross-reference the locations of the red dots with the positions of the stars in the Serpentes constellation. They discovered that each red dot corresponded to a specific star, and that each star represented a specific target. The closer they looked, the more disturbing and twisted the plan became. The most important target as the star closest to the heart of the serpent. That star aligned perfectly with the Capitol building. Agent Williams and Agent Jenkins raced to inform their superiors. The fate of Washington, D.C., and perhaps the entire nation rested on their shoulders. But as they prepared to deliver their findings, a chilling realization dawned upon them. There was still another star in the constellation, the star that represented the serpent's head. They checked the map and found a final red dot. It marked a location just outside of Camp Hereford, a small, unassuming farm. But what made this farm so important? What secrets did it hold? As they delved deeper into the mystery, Agent Williams discovered the farm was owned by the family of a former nurse. A nurse who had worked at Camp Hereford briefly before being transferred, a nurse named Anna Schmidt. The pieces began to fall into place. Anna Schmidt was not just a spy, she was the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. And she was heading to New York City to escape. They needed to act fast. They needed to find Anna Schmidt before she could disappear forever. Meanwhile, Sergeant Miller had arrived in Italy. He had traveled by train and by boat, using false documents and disguises to evade detection. He had finally reached the Italian Alps, a vast and imposing mountain range that stretched across the northern part of the country. He knew that the temple was hidden somewhere in these mountains, but he had no idea where to start looking. He had no map, no guide, and no knowledge of the local terrain. He was alone in enemy territory with nothing but his determination and his serpent coin. He began his search, hiking through the mountains, climbing over rocks, and wading through streams. He followed the ancient trails, searching for any sign of the temple. He asked the local villagers for information, but they were suspicious and unhelpful. They were wary of strangers, especially Americans, and they refused to speak about the temple. Days turned into weeks, and Miller's search continued. He was growing weary and discouraged, but he refused to give up. He knew that the fate of the world depended on him. He had to find the temple. He had to destroy the artifact. One day, while hiking through a remote valley, Miller stumbled upon an old shepherd. The shepherd was sitting on a rock watching his flock of sheep graze in the meadow. Miller approached the shepherd cautiously, offering him a cigarette. The shepherd accepted the cigarette, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Miller asked the shepherd if he knew anything about the temple. The shepherd hesitated, his gaze shifting nervously. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. He said that the temple was located high in the mountains, in a place called the Valley of the Shadows. He said that the temple was guarded by demons and that no one who had ever entered the valley had ever returned. Miller thanked the shepherd and gave him a few dollars. He turned and walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he was getting closer. He was on the verge of discovering the truth. Back in New York City, Anna Schmidt, now Eliza Mayer, was preparing to board the ship to Argentina. She had checked into a small hotel near the docks and she was waiting for her departure time. She was nervous and restless, constantly checking the clock and peering out the window. She had a feeling that she was being watched, that someone was following her. She tried to dismiss her fears, telling herself that it was just paranoia. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in danger. She decided to leave the hotel and go for a walk. She needed to clear her head to calm her nerves. She stepped out into the bustling streets of New York City, surrounded by crowds of people. She tried to blend in to become invisible, but she still felt like she was being watched. She quickened her pace, weaving through the crowds, trying to lose whoever was following her. She turned a corner and ducked into a dark alleyway. She stopped and listened, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear footsteps approaching. Someone was coming after her. She pulled out a small pistol from her purse, her hand trembling. She was ready to defend herself. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Agent Thomas Williams. "Anna Schmidt, you're under arrest," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. Anna Schmidt raised her pistol and fired. Agent Williams ducked, the bullet whizzing past his head. He drew his own weapon and returned fire. A gun battle erupted in the alleyway, bullets ricocheting off the walls. Anna Schmidt was a skilled marksman, but Agent Williams was a seasoned FBI agent. He had been trained to handle situations like this. He managed to corner Anna Schmidt, forcing her to drop her weapon. He placed her under arrest, handcuffing her and reading her rights. Anna Schmidt was defeated. She had been caught. Her mission had failed. She had failed the Aboyer. She had failed the cult of the serpent. She had failed herself. Agent Williams took Anna Schmidt to a nearby FBI office where she was interrogated. He questioned her about the cult of the serpent, the Aboyer's plan, and the map that had been recovered from the general's quarters. Anna Schmidt refused to cooperate. She remained silent, defiant, and unyielding. Agent Williams tried every tactic he could think of, but she wouldn't budge. He was growing frustrated and discouraged. He knew that time was running out. The Aboyer's attack was imminent, and he needed to get information from Anna Schmidt before it was too late. He decided to try a different approach. He appealed to her sense of patriotism, her sense of duty. He told her that the Aboyer was using her, that they were manipulating her, and that they didn't care about her. He told her that the only way to stop the attack was to cooperate with him, to tell him everything she knew. Anna Schmidt listened intently, her expression softening. She began to waver, her resolve crumbling. She realized that Agent Williams was right. She had been used, she had been manipulated, she had been betrayed. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She told Agent Williams everything. She revealed the Aboyer's plan, the targets of the attack, and the identities of the other members of the cult of the serpent. She told him about the farm outside of Camp Hereford, the secret location where the Aboyer was planning to launch their attack. Agent Williams was stunned by what he had learned. He realized that the attack was far more complex and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He thanked Anna Schmidt for her cooperation, and he promised her that he would do everything he could to protect her. He immediately alerted his superiors, informing them of the new information he had obtained. A team of FBI agents was dispatched to the farm outside of Camp Hereford. They were ordered to secure the location and to arrest anyone who was found there. Meanwhile, Sergeant Miller had reached the Valley of the Shadows. The valley was a desolate and forbidding place, shrouded in mist and surrounded by towering peaks. The air was cold and thin, and the silence was broken only by the sound of the wind. Miller felt a sense of dread as he entered the valley. He knew that he was in danger. He knew that he was being watched. He continued his search, following the ancient trails, searching for any sign of the temple. He came across a series of strange symbols carved into the rocks, symbols that he recognized from the serpent coin. He realized that he was on the right track. He was getting closer to the temple. He followed the symbols, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached a clearing and he saw it. The temple. The temple was a massive structure built of black stone with towering spires and ominous gargoyles. It was a place of darkness and evil, a place where the cult of the serpent had once performed its dark rituals. Miller approached the temple cautiously, his rifle raised. He reached the entrance and he saw two guards standing watch. The guards were dressed in black robes and they were armed with swords. They were members of the cult of the serpent. They saw Miller approaching and they raised their swords. "You shall not pass," one of the guards said, his voice cold and menacing. Miller raised his rifle and fired. The guards fell to the ground dead. Miller stepped over their bodies and entered the temple. The temple was dark and eerie, filled with strange symbols and unsettling statues. The air was thick with the smell of incense and decay. Miller walked through the temple, his senses on high alert. He knew that he was in danger. He knew that he was being watched. He reached the central chamber and he saw it. The artifact. The artifact was a large golden statue of a serpent coiled around a skull. It was a thing of immense power, a relic that had been revered by the cult of the serpent for centuries. Miller approached the statue, his hand trembling. He knew that he had to destroy it. He raised his rifle, ready to fire. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You cannot destroy the artifact," the voice said. "It is too powerful." Miller turned around and he saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman dressed in a black robe. It was Sarah. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Miller asked, his voice filled with shock. "I am here to protect the artifact," Sarah said, her voice cold and emotionless. "I am a member of the cult of the serpent." Miller stared at Sarah in disbelief. He couldn't believe that she was a member of the cult. He had trusted her, he had confided in her, he had even fallen in love with her, and now she was standing before him, an enemy. "I thought you were different," Miller said, his voice filled with sadness. "I thought you were better than this." "I am what I have to be," Sarah said, her eyes glinting with dark power. "I am a servant of the serpent." Sarah raised her hand and a group of cult members emerged from the shadows. They were armed with swords and knives and they were ready to attack. Miller realized that he was outnumbered, he was surrounded, he was trapped, but he refused to give up. He would fight to the death. He would destroy the artifact, even if it cost him his life. Just then, the ground began to shake. The walls of the temple trembled. The statue of the serpent began to glow. A voice boomed through the chamber, a voice that was ancient and powerful. "You cannot stop us," the voice said. "The serpent will rise again." Suddenly, the floor beneath Miller's feet gave way. He fell into a dark abyss, plummeting into the depths of the earth. Sarah and the cult members watched as he disappeared, a look of triumph on their faces. They had defeated him. They had protected the artifact. They had ensured the survival of the cult of the serpent. But as they celebrated their victory, they didn't realize that Miller was still alive. He had landed in a hidden chamber, a secret room beneath the temple. And in that room, he found something that would change everything. He found a map of the United States, and on that map he saw a series of red dots. The same red dots that had been found on the map in the general's quarters, but these dots were different. They were connected. They formed a line, and that line led to a single location, a location that was far more important than the White House, a location that was the key to the POWs' entire plan, a location that was right here in this temple. The map revealed a tunnel branching off from this very chamber, a tunnel that snaked its way beneath the Italian Alps, crossing borders and continents, a tunnel that led directly to Camp Hereford. Miller stared at the map, his mind racing. He finally understood. The POWs wasn't just planning an attack on the United States. They were planning something much bigger. They were planning to unleash a deadly virus, a bioweapon that would wipe out the entire human race. And the key to unleashing that virus was hidden somewhere in Camp Hereford. But where? As Miller studied the map, one detail stood out. The tunnel ended beneath a specific building in the camp, the building that housed the camp's kitchen. And as he remembered the prisoners he had guarded, one thought struck him. There was a new chef, a cook no one knew before. As the truth became clear, a stone crumbled above him, closing the tunnel forever.